Dive into the world of relentless innovation with a thinker who challenges the status quo. Now, what if the key to monumental change in business was how to shift how we think? Now, I want you to join us as we explore groundbreaking ideas that redefine what's really possible in business and in life.
Welcome to Fortify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
Now, today we're excited to welcome a good friend of mine and colleague on the speaking circuit, also a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, Stephen Shapiro. He's a powerhouse of innovation and a prominent voice in the business industry. Now, Stephen has spent decades redefining the art of innovation and helping companies, both big and small, achieve competitive advantages through fresh thinking. I want to learn more about what that is. He's got a new book out called Pivotal, which I know we're going to talk about. So welcome, Stephen, to Fortify Live. We're live right now on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and a few other places. And the audio of this becomes the Business Growth Show podcast. Stephen, thanks for carving time out. Welcome to Fortify Live.
It's great to be here, especially given my decades of experience. I sound like a really old dude now.
Okay, well, at least you write introductions, right? So the bottom line is, one of the things I would tell as we start is, we've known each other for a long time. We've sat on the National Speakers Association board, and we've worked together on masterminds before. And one of the things that you and I have both done, because when we say decades, is we've remained timely, topical, and relevant. And so one of the things that you do to do that is you come out with a new book, every season, it seems like. So you've got this new book, Pivotal. What is this book about, and why should people read it? Now, this isn't a promotion for the book, but what inspired you to create the book with what's going on in the current climate that we're dealing with today?
So what happened was, the content of this book I've had for a long time, been using with clients for a very long time, decades in some cases. But the pandemic was really the impetus for the book, because what happened was everybody was pivoting, everybody was changing direction. And when I worked with the leaders in organizations, they didn't have clarity around what was next, because every time they would turn around, there was something new they had to worry about. And the employees, they were struggling because they were getting conflicting information and they were being told to be pulled in different directions. And so when I looked at the stress, the burnout, the overload, the confusion that people had, I realized, what can we do to give some level of clarity to people in an environment of uncertainty and unpredictability? And that's how the Pivotal book was born. It really tries to provide some stability in an otherwise chaotic environment.
Yeah, everybody I talk to now on, we both work strategically with, all types of different brands and franchise brands and B2B and B2C. And they're always dealing with enormous change, right? They're dealing with pivotal change. They're dealing with employee turnover. They have culture and leadership issues. And, there's a lot of people who talk about innovation and change, but there's actually the science behind it and what you do. So when you work with these organizations, share some insights about what does the client think the problem is versus what the problem really is.
And each company is going to be different. Each environment is going to be different. Quite often, so the premise of Pivotal is we need to start focusing more on what doesn't change. So unfortunately, innovation has been associated with novelty. What's
Right.
new, what's next. And what I've realized is everybody's ignoring what's now. So what is that doesn't change in an ever-changing environment? What are the things that are going to be timeless for our organizations that if we were to double down and make larger investments in them would have greater returns? So that's the general idea of my perspective, which is a little different than others who are always focused on what's next, what's new, what's different, how do we change?
That makes so much sense. So, tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about how you got into this topic and a little bit about your background and the work that you do.
So I've been in innovation for decades, literally. I remember 1995, I was working for Accenture. And at the time, I was one of the co-leads of what was called business process reengineering. So basically what we were doing is we were helping optimize companies. And look, I knew as we optimized companies, people would lose their jobs. But I was working on this one project and 10,000 people lost their job because of the work that we were doing. And again, it was a number, it's a statistic, but I didn't have a deep connection to it until one day I was in a hotel after spending a day with my client, and there was a news story about my client, and it was about 3 executives from that company who lost their job a year before. The first person was the most optimistic. He was living off of inheritance. So at least he had money. The second person cried the entire interview because he needed to mow lawns to feed his family. Again, this was a top executive. And the third person committed suicide.
Oh.
And I went back to the company the next day and he said, was that story true? And they said, yes. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I walked off the project. I quit the company. As it turns out, I took a leave of absence for 6 months. And in that time, I realized I loved what I was doing, but I wanted to help companies grow, not shrink. And back in the mid 90s, innovation wasn't a word that was used a lot, but I latched onto it. And that's all I've done basically for the past close to 30 years now.
So what are some of the challenges you see that they're facing? I know we kind of talked about this in the opening a few minutes ago, but for me, there's always a disconnect between what they think the problem is and what it is. And, I've said this on other episodes that, when I do the pre-event questionnaire with a strategic partner, a board I'm going to work with, or an organization that, I'm going to speak to, you and I both do the mystery shopping. And then, we have that pre-event call where we talk to all the executives. And it's always interesting because every executive, if you have more than one, you get 3 different answers, right? And so they never really understand the difference between innovation, leadership, change, culture, communication. There's all these other team building, management, and so there's all these different things that they think the problem is. I really like your concept of what's now versus what's next. I think that's really essential that organizations look at that. And you're famous for going into organizations and helping them understand the dynamics. So the reason I'm bringing this up is when I think of innovation, I think, because I'm an entrepreneur, I always think in what's next. Like I never really think of what's now. I think that's a really great takeaway for our listeners is what's working now. I always talk about what are you going to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing, right? I don't know. I picked that up from Dan Sullivan or someone decades ago. But as it relates to the role of leaders, how can leaders be better prepared to encourage innovation in their organizations, but still stay compliant with the best practices? Because I think that would be the challenge. I mean, I do a lot in franchising, and franchises, like I'll give you just a quick before you answer, don't forget the question. But when I first started, I was known as the business growth innovator because I looked at businesses and I could bridge the gap between a value proposition and a target market. So in marketing, you have to be innovative, and how do you be more creative to get that done? But then I started working in franchising, and the franchise world, 34 years ago, they don't want innovation. They want their people to follow their systems. So back to the original question is, how do you encourage innovation, but still have organizations, stay on track with compliance and best practices?
So one thing I'll just as a quick side note is one of my books is called Best Practices Are Stupid. So
yeah, I want to talk about that one too. I saw that too.
We'll leave that as a little side note for the moment. The key is that there's a myth around command and control. We think as leaders in an organization, we have all the answers. But really the role of leadership, in my opinion, is to ask better questions. And if we ask better questions, then we can unleash the innovation in others. And so, making sure people follow rules, we've been really good at that. And I'm a big believer in we need to have a box. I mean, in innovation, we often say, think outside the box. And I actually think that's terrible advice because there's a whole variety of reasons when you give somebody a blank sheet of paper and say, do whatever you want, come up with whatever idea you want. It tends to be low value and usually a little crazy. But if we give them a better box, and it's that right box, and the right box is a better question. So that whole art in my previous book called Invisible Solutions gives 25 different lenses that help you identify that better box. So if we can give structure actually enhances creativity and innovation when done correctly. Unfortunately, most organizations give really small boxes that don't allow them to have any level of creativity.
All right. So if you're listening now to the Business Growth Podcast, we're talking to Stephen Shapiro. He's an innovation instigator. You can find his books on Amazon, of course, or on his website at stephenshapiro.com. I'm going to spell it for the listeners, STEPHEN, and then Shapiro, SHAPIRO. So check him out at stephenshapiro.com. And one of the reasons I love interviewing him is because when he has a concept, he puts it into a condensed format into a book that's consumable and actionable. And that's what I really like about his books is that you can consume them and you can understand it, and it's applicable for all levels of an organization and levels of experience. And then also it's actionable. You can actually do something with it. So it's not just a great thought. And so on that note, you mentioned one of your books. Now I haven't read the new book Pivotal, so I have not got that book. I need to get that. But on the best practices are stupid. What inspired you to come up with such a creative title? Because I think the title is just amazing, by the way. And how is that book being received? And it reminds me of Connie Podesta, because we did a book with her. Goal setting doesn't work. It was a concept, and we were talking about goal setting, but it's the way most people did it didn't work. So I know it's probably the same vein that best practices are stupid because most people use them wrong. But I want to hear from you, the expert.
Sure. And I love anything that's a little bit in your face. So I have a book called Goal Free Living. That was from 20 years ago. It's on how do you live a life without goals. And I've always been looking for what is it that people do that doesn't actually work the way they think it works. And so with best practices, I'd be in meetings. What's the best practice? What's the best practice? And they would be talking about practices that made absolutely no sense in the context of their environment. And so, look, I can get into the whole philosophy and theory around why best practices are stupid, but basically context matters. What works for Apple may not work for you because you're totally different companies, totally different industries, totally different cultures. And regardless, if you're copying somebody else's practice, you're replicating, you're not innovating. So for some parts of your business, look, best practices are great. If you're talking about sort of the table stakes, what are the things that we need to do well? You need to use best practices in those environments. But if it's something that's differentiating, if it's something that's going to set you apart, you need to innovate where you differentiate, and then you can use best practices elsewhere.
Well, you've been sharing a lot of gold nuggets. I mean, when you talked about, leadership and asking better questions, and same with innovation, to ask better questions. I picked up a comment from someone, a mentor a long time ago, that was, if you're asking the wrong question, the answer doesn't matter. And I think that organizations, they're not asking enough of the right questions. They're not really tracking it. And I think context is very important. And what I do in marketing and what you do in innovation have a lot of similar theories behind it, because I'll work with organizations that do copycat marketing. They look at what the market's doing and they try to copy it. I've had strategic consulting clients in my high-end consulting say, well, I paid this coach and they created a funnel for me. And then I go look at it and I'm like, that will not work in your industry. Like they're applying a tool to the wrong application. And so one of the things I'm always talking about, and now that people are using AI to write, all their content and to try to be innovative, I tell them context is everything. Like it's not just the tool, it's the context. And I think that's what you're saying as it relates to innovation or best practices. It's contextual. And, I always say test, track, modify, and repeat. Test what's working, record what works. See, now you have a benchmark, and then see how you can move the needles. Is that similar to what you're doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Context is so incredibly important, and timing is important. So a lot of times we think something was a best practice, but we just happen to be in the right place at the right time, or we had a first mover advantage. So in the world of marketing, Hermosi was so popular with his video style, but he flooded the market, and now it's like it doesn't really stand out anymore. So there's all these different styles, whatever it is. So best practices sometimes are old. It's an old practice now, and it doesn't work today. So there's timing, there's luck, there's context. And the one which is actually to me most interesting is the fact that what we think was a best practice was actually not the cause of our success. And I do some fun exercises with my clients to demonstrate that causation, correlation, and coincidence, we need to understand that, because just because we did something and it appeared to work didn't mean it was the cause. It might have just been a random coincidence, or it might have been correlated in some different way.
Well, one of the things I talk about is profit hides a lot of mistakes. And when I'm brought in
Yes.
to work with an organization to help them, increase their high value clients, increase the frequency of purchase, increase the average transaction, and improve operations, I'm looking at all those things. Now, I don't use big words like that, so I don't have the causation, coincidence, but certainly I look at those things because being a critical thinker is, I think, a really good tool that everybody needs to have. And critical thinking means, what are you basing your opinions on? And maybe you have a belief that isn't serving you, and it's time to get some new beliefs. And I know that for me, the more I've learned, the more I know I don't know. So while I am regarded as this expert and goes in and helps all these organizations grow and accelerate, I'm also very humble and open to know, contextually, is that even applicable? Because, in my world, there's thousands of marketing methods, but if you don't have the right message going to the right market, using the right medium, it doesn't matter. I mean, I got a postcard the other day, it just came in, it's sitting over here. And I thought, this person who's sending this postcard has a good message. They're sending it to the ideal client, but they sent it through a medium that 90% of the time I would have tossed that postcard away. If it hadn't been in my arena, is the only reason I kept it. But if I was looking at it through the eyes of a customer, that would never get to a C-level executive. So share with us an insight or a story of companies that are being innovative, or what's an example where you've come in either as a case study or something interested to show innovation in use.
Well, this is a company, they're not a client of mine, but they're in the Pivotal book. And it's just, when people read Pivotal, this is the story which everybody's like, they can really relate to it. And it is Radio Flyer. So I don't know, how many people are familiar with them, but they're known for their little red wagon. They've been around since 1917, I think it is. And so when I talked with Robert Passon, who is the CEO, the chief wagon officer, I think is his official title, a lot of times they would think we're in the wagon business, we're in the vehicle business, whatever. And what he realized was, when he talks to his customers, and I think that's a key thing, talk to people. They will tell you the right messages. And he said, every time you say, hey, I'm the CEO of Radio Flyer, he says, two things always happen. They smile, and then they instantly launch into a story about how their wagon was a rocket ship or a flying carpet, or somebody just told me the other day they use their wagon every Christmas. It's like actually the centerpiece of their Christmas ornaments, whatever it is. And so what he realized was, we're not in the wagon business. We're in the bringing smiles business that will last a lifetime. And if you think about it from that perspective, everything they do, if you're the person answering the phone, your job isn't to sell a wagon. Your job isn't to serve a customer. Your job is to bring a smile, to make sure that that call will have a lasting memory. They created a new store in Chicago. Everything around it is designed to bring smiles. That's the measure of success. And I just love how the fact that they're clear on their differentiator. It is not a product. It is actually a capability and a belief that they have. And it is cascaded all the way down to every person inside the organization. That, to me, is innovation.
Yeah, I asked an organization. I just spoke in Indianapolis the other day and just flew back last night. And it was interesting. When me with that client, I pick somebody out in the audience and I'll say, how many employees do you have? And this particular person, his name was Mark. He said, well, I've got 6 locations. And I said, how many employees do you have? And he said, about 80. And I said, okay, how many of them are involved in the customer experience, in marketing and sales? And he said 6. And of course, I asked the question 5 more times until the audience said 80, right? And I've tried to express to him that people think they're really good at one of 3 things: delivering the product or service, so they're a practitioner; marketing and sales, they understand how to create leads and sell; or in operations, being able to lead and manage and do the finances. But they're never really good in all 3. And so when he was thinking about his 80 employees, he was coming from the box. And what I tried to say is, any touch point that they have with their customer is an opportunity to improve the customer experience. It's across the whole journey. And so people in accounting, billing, how your phones are answered, I mean, the whole thing. And so the takeaway was mystery shop, but they also create the culture. What I like about that story about Radio Flyer is they really are engaged in their culture. They're not saying, oh, we build red wagons, because then they're a commodity. They're saying, we really focus on creating smiles, which elevates the brand into the emotional side, the results side. And I think that our listeners and viewers, regardless of your role, whether you're a C-level executive, we have those on listeners. We have private equity groups. We have, employees of companies that are just interested in improving, because we cover a lot of different topics on this show. And I just think that it's so important to be open-minded, to be a critical thinker, and then to really remember what's our why. And I'm not trying to be Simon Sinek, but I'm just saying, why are we doing what we're doing? And once someone shifts that belief system, into it, then then sales don't become such a scary word anymore. Because I believe, and I'd love to hear your feedback, is, I believe that all marketing and sales is interruption marketing, right? You're going to interrupt somebody. They're not planning and waiting for your message. And it's just giving people enough of the right information that they can make good decisions, right? So it's not hype or manipulation or some special tactic. It's literally just giving them good information. Would you disagree? Would you agree? What do you think?
Oh, I think that's great. And one of the messages, I mentioned it already, but I'll reiterate it and then talk about it in the context of selling, is one of the messages that I strongly believe is that you want to innovate where you differentiate, which means that you want to put your energies where you excel, what customers value about you, what makes you distinctive, all those types of things. And then you want to make sure, first of all, every person in your organization contributes to that differentiator. So coming back to what you're saying, it's not 8 people in customer service, it's 80 people. Well, it's the same thing with your differentiator. It's not a group. 100% of your organization needs to understand and contribute to and align with your differentiator. And then when it comes to sales, one of the things I believe is you sell where you differentiate. It gives you clarity on your message. If you know what you do better than anyone else, that your customers value and really, really want, that should be your message, not all of the table stakes, all the things that everyone else could say. You should only be giving the message of the things that are uniquely yours, that create the greatest amount of value. So the reason why I chose the word pivotal for the title is pivot means to basically spin around in circles and shift direction. Pivotal, its definition is to be of crucial importance or to be irreplaceable. And to me, when you focus on your differentiator in customer terms, then you become irreplaceable. The more value you can create for your customers, the more valuable you become and the more irreplaceable you become.
Yeah, that's such sage advice. All right, so I'm going to shift it to one more topic. When people think about innovation, I'm doing a lot on AI right now, artificial intelligence, and it seems like any speaker who can't make it in whatever topic they were in are now experts in AI. We've seen that happen when social media came out and YouTube came out. There are all these experts. And basically, I would say that anybody with a laptop right now is calling themselves an AI expert. But I do believe that it's going to be the most disruptive element in the business and personal world. I believe it's like a sentient being has landed on the planet and it's here. But I also believe it's a fancy toaster on autocomplete, right? Because I've reached into it enough to know that it's simulating data and intelligence, but it's not really intelligence in a sense, at least not yet. And so I'm curious, as you are an expert in innovation, what you're seeing and what do you think the impact is? And again, for those of you listening to this, these questions were not prepared. We jumped on, he's on here, it's Fortify Live. I know Stephen, we're just answering questions as we go. So what do you see the pros and cons of AI, or how are you using it? I'm just curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love AI. I use it a lot in my business. So I try to figure out ways of leveraging it to do things that are more routine types of work. So for example, I mentioned the Invisible Solutions book, which has the 25 lenses. It helps you reframe a problem, but the book doesn't reframe the problem. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to create a custom chatbot that actually will do the reframing. I programmed it with my 25 lenses, gave it enough context and content, and my clients use it now and get incredible results. Now, it doesn't replace me. It doesn't replace their thinking, but it accelerates the thinking because it gets sort of the obvious ideas off the table so that they can really push it to that next level. So I love it for that. I've cloned my voice. So I'm creating audiobooks using my cloned AI voice. We're translating books in different languages using AI. So I love it. I use it all the time. And to be clear, I will never claim to be an AI technology expert, but I am an AI strategy expert. And there's a big difference because you said something earlier, which was spot on, which is, the principles that I'm talking about are the same principles you're using. Well, principles are timeless.
Yep.
And they're context independent in many cases, because if they're really fundamental principles of the way things work, then they should work everywhere. And so some of the principles that are associated with AI have worked with any technology in the past. The same concepts are the same. So, I could dig into sort of the framework and philosophy, but it may be a little too deep for this right now. But I love AI. But I guess here's the message I would tell anybody who's listening. is unless you are an organization that is differentiating on AI, and I don't mean embedding AI capabilities in your current solutions, but rather you are the AI expert. You are the company that spends all your time, like Accenture spending billions of dollars on AI. They will be the AI experts. If you're a healthcare system, you will never differentiate on AI. You need to involve it, you need to use it, you need to leverage it, but putting all your energy and resources into that is taking your eye off of your differentiator. So your key strategy is for anything that's not differentiating, and I call them support and core. Don't need to get into the details, but for those, look, you could try to create your own custom solutions and embed AI, or your better solution is to find someone who has a solution that already has AI embedded in it, so you don't even have to think about AI for those two lower levels, the support and core. And when it comes to differentiating, then it's custom solutions, partnering with experts who know everything there is to know about AI. That is a powerful, sound strategy because you have to do it. And the last thing I'll say on AI is that second level core, those are the table stakes. Those are the expectations. You get them wrong or you don't have them, customers will leave. It's not the reason why someone does business with you. From my
100%.
perspective, and from most organizations, AI is just core. The technology is evolving so quickly that if you spend all your time trying to implement the latest and greatest, you will always be behind. Technology is, for most companies, not a differentiator. It is a capability that you have that creates value, that can create new product, create new technology, but it is not typically a technology that is a differentiator for most companies.
No, I'd agree. I do a webinar every month. It's a lead generator. It's called Unleashing the Power of AI for Any Role. I'm going to pop up a screen real quick on the screen. So anybody who's watching this right now, but if you're listening, you can go to profitrichresults.com/AI-training. It's a no price opt-in. You can opt in and you can watch a 60-minute video on AI. And I update it all the time. So when you opt in once, and you go to the landing page, every time I do a new one, I just replace the video on the landing page. So you'll be able to get it. But one of the things that I found is essential to that, and what I'm telling people is the same thing, is through strategy, right? I mean, AI can help you make better decisions, be more productive, but there's also a lot of pitfalls. And I've got a new book coming out called AI Mindshift, which is how to unleash the power but avoid the pitfalls, because I think there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation related to it. And the topic is changing so dang quickly that you can't stay up to speed on it anyway. And so, I think that anybody, you and I would be doing our listeners, our viewers, a disservice if we're not telling them, hey, AI is here. Don't sit on the fence. You've taken your book content. One of the things I did with my book is I've got a book called, Accelerate, and I also have Superpower. Well, I took the whole book. Sorry, away from my microphone. I took the whole book and uploaded it and created custom GPTs. And so I didn't even have to pay anybody to do anything fancy. And then it's trained just on my data. And now when I speak, I can give them the Accelerate GPT. And now they can go in there and say, give me 5 ideas for local networking. Help me overcome sales objections, because I have a whole bunch of rocket boosters on how to overcome sales objections in a service business in B2B and B2C. And so they're able to go in there and say, I have this objection, and then my training, my content adds value. So I think that the real key takeaway for organizations is, if you've got content and you're trying to help your employees, your staff, or your customers consume it, AI can help you do that. It's multimodal. It speaks in all different languages. I mean, you made a reference to, speaking in different languages. I've got something like that. There's really only 4 ways to grow a business. Number 1, you want more clients, but we don't want more clients. We want higher value clients. Número 2, aumentar la transacción promedio. Sucede al agrupar o agregar mejoras de valor y ventas cruzadas. Okay, so that's just a quick example, but I can speak English, I can speak Spanish. I got hired to go speak in Toronto, and they wanted me to speak in English and do a virtual presentation to send the video. It was a virtual presentation I got hired for. They wanted me to speak in English, but do French subtitles. And I said, I've got a better yet. What if I do the whole presentation in French? It's my voice, my face. And so I did the whole presentation in English. Then I used a tool on, I'll give you a link in a second, to convert it to French. and then sent them the whole video, 45-minute keynote in French, and they loved it. Now, I did start out and say, this is Ford Saeks. I'm using AI. Please forgive any dialect or mistakes that I'm going to be making, but please enjoy this presentation. And I think those listeners and viewers at the company had a lot better user experience by doing it. So I think the key here is it is a tool, like you said. You look at the core and apply the tool properly. Like it's just you and I went to Best Buy, or not Best Buy, to Home Depot, and we bought a bunch of tools. We could put them in a yard and throw all the tools in the yard and say, okay, build a house. Well, the tool is the tool. That's not the solution.
Absolutely. I think we get so enamored with the technology, we don't spend the time to think about the strategy. What problem are we solving? What are we really making possible that wasn't possible before? What's the real issue? What's the real opportunity? And and are they important? We could start applying the AI to everything, and now all of a sudden we spend all of our time, automating and AIing things that just don't matter. So we have to be strategic. And the only way to be strategic to me is to figure out what is it where you differentiate. And when it comes to AI, you want to do your custom solutions, your best work, your best innovation around those differentiators, and then find somebody else who can handle almost everything else.
Yeah, I'd say a higher weakness. And I also think that when we get into high tech, a real differentiator is high touch. It's just like when we had the automated phone systems, press 1 for this, press 2 for English. It's always interesting. I saw TikTok or someone said, why does it ask you to press 1 for English and then the person answering the phone doesn't speak English, right? It's like, just I don't want to be political or canceled nowadays. So just, if they've listened this long into the episode, I'm fine with that. But I think it's really important is that, AI is a tool, but not a replacement. And I think that what's going to be more important in the future is that high touch. So organizations that offer that human connection, that don't try to just automate everything. I know for me, it's frustrating. I mean, I was flying back from Indianapolis, and of course, Delta, changed the flight. And then I was trouble, and it said use the app, and of course, you couldn't use the app because it was too soon to make the flight change. And then I went to the counter, and they couldn't do it because they were working the flight. Then I went to the Sky Club, and they were busy, and it's like, okay, this is terrible. They're telling me to use online solutions that then direct me back to the airport, and the airport directs me to online, and you get this circle of confusion. So I think the real takeaway for those listeners is map out your customer journey, look at what touch points you have that can be automated, that can help save time or be frictionless. I like to talk about how can you be frictionless with your business and the business work you do, but then at the same time, offer that human touch. Because I think that businesses that try to go, the pendulum's going to swing both ways. I think everybody's rushing one way to use AI for everything. And I think that within 18 months, there's going to be a balance. Plus the technology is changing so fast. Multimodal, it can see, it can read, it can hear. I use it to translate. I needed a table for the podium. And I was trying to tell this guy, and he's just shaking his head. And he said, Portuguese. And so I grabbed my phone and I said, opened up ChatGPT, and I said, hey, act as my translator. I'm going to be speaking in English, convert it to Portuguese. And when you hear Portuguese, convert it to English so I can have a conversation. Do you understand? It said, yes, Ford, I understand. I said, hey, can I get a 6-foot table for the podium? And it converted it to Portuguese. And he immediately nodded and said something in Portuguese, which then translated to English. It said, yes, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Now, that's something that I'm sure I could have probably tried to do with Google Translate or, even Google itself. But the tools are becoming so quick that soon, I'm sure, if it's not out already, I know they've got glasses that can do it, but you're going to be able to have an earpiece that if you hear another language, it's going to automatically convert it. And I'd love that because there's times when I'm in a Japanese restaurant or someone who's speaking Spanish around where I'm like, I'd really love to know what they're saying. So I think it's going to transform a lot of different things. But the real takeaway that Steve and I have been sharing with those listeners here is it has its place. But I want you to think strategically and then tactically. Any closing thoughts on that?
I'll reiterate 2 things that you just said because I think they're really extremely important. One is you need to figure out the strategy and do everything from there. Again, my perspective is if you focus on your differentiator, things become much clearer. And a differentiator, also just to make it clear, is it's not what makes you different, but it is what helps you stand out, that creates the greatest value that will stand the test of time. So we could dig deep into that some other day. But the other thing, which I just think is so incredibly important, is in a world of technology, I do believe we are, because we're human beings, are going to crave that human work. And I do think that relationships are going to become more important. We're going to crave them more. And technology is great, but they're just tools. They're just tools.
Yep, absolutely. Well, this has been great. Thank you for being on Fortify Live. This is Stephen Shapiro. Again, find him at stephenshapiro.com.
Thank you for tuning in to Fortify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.